Okay, I think we've got a bunch of people. We've slowed the onslaught of people. I should that's a negative. But anyway, before we get started, the waterfall of people. Before we get started, Randy, did you want to talk a little bit for a minute?
Sure. I just wanted to say hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I know it's a hot evening and there's other things to do. Typically, when we have in-person meetings, we're a little low on the participation during the summertime because people are taking vacations and whatever. So I just want to let everybody know we do have a new member that joined this month. Her name is Deborah LeClaire. And are you here, Debbie? I can't see, but I don't think you are. I invited her, I told her how to do it and all that stuff. And I'm remiss, I just wanted to see, is there anyone else that's fairly new? I know, Andy, you're within the last year or so. Did you ever get to introduce yourself? We normally go through this, and since the Zoom thing, I've kind of spaced out. And so if there's any new members that want to say hi and tell us a little bit about you that we haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'd encourage you to take this moment to do so. Yes, no, yes, no. Jerry and I are both popping our heads.
Just waiting. Well, I just joined in the last summer, I think.
Right.
And enjoy all of the aspects of learning about this. And I appreciate and value the people who have the scientific engineering backgrounds that I don't have. And so I kind of look at that stuff like I do quality art. And I go, wow, that's really cool. But I'm I'm not that way. And so I mostly stick to the appreciative side of things. And so I look at it, I go, wow, that's pretty cool stuff. And then subsequently to last summer, then I just started into the astrophotography world. And that's really become a pretty satisfying thing for me.
That's awesome.
I'm not happy with all my images, but I guess that's part of the journey as well.
Yeah.
And so I like the physical manual part of it. I know some people don't really like to have to do the setup, the tear down, this and that. And I'm sympathetic to that, but I still like it. It meets kind of a need in me. And I like to solder all my own wires and do all of that kind of stuff. And so that part of it, I enjoy. And lately, seeing the things that I never paid attention to before, the appearance of Orion, the appearance of Leo, the appearance of Rho, and things like this that, of course, they were happening, but I never paid attention. And so, Lord willing, I'll have a few more years to continue to pay attention and be appreciative.
Good for you.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm really enjoying all of this stuff. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for chiming in, Andy. And I'm missing Orion already myself. So
There's beauty and comfort in process, I have to say. So I'm with you on that one.
is there anyone else that wants to tell us a little bit about yourself that may be a newer member in the last year and a half? I don't hear anyone. Okay, Amy. Well, thank you for the time.
Oh, sure. We did discuss about talking like club business, but there really isn't anything going on as of yet. But the minute stuff starts happening, anyway, so tonight we have Alan Gillespie back, who, if you've seen his images before, it's a very good thing. And he is going to talk about Milky Way photography.
Hey, am I on?
You are on.
Okay, and are you seeing my screen here?
Yes.
It says Milky Way photography. Okay, good. Not really sure what you guys are actually seeing when I do this. So, yeah, so welcome to my talk on Milky Way photography. A couple of months ago, I did a talk on some lunar photography, and I wanted to start by saying that Milky Way photography is more where my passion is. And for many years, I have liked to just step back from the eyepiece or the camera and gaze up in awe at the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. So this is a talk on how to photograph the Milky Way with a lot of examples. And so feel free to ask questions or to tell me to slow down or go back or anything like that. So the first thing I want to do is introduce Dr. Roger N. Clark and his website, clarkvision.com. All right, so Dr. Clark has his PhD from MIT in planetary science, and he does planetary imaging for NASA and works for USGS and University of Hawaii and some other assorted and sundry groups. He also has an extensive website with lots of articles on night and low vision photography. And so for anybody out there who's at all interested in astrophotography, I highly suggest that you check out his articles. So here are some examples of his work, and I put RNC down here in the text on the bottom for his things. So he uses stock photo equipment. These are not hydrogen alpha modified cameras. And he gets excellent results that I personally find to be very inspiring. I should be so good. All right, so then I once was talking to a friend at OSP, and I told him that fortune favors those who are practiced and prepared. So know your equipment, be prepared to operate in the dark without having to look up instructions. Make sure that you have all your equipment ready to go. Make sure that your batteries are all fully charged up before you head out. It helps to have a plan, some kind of plan in advance, but always be prepared for serendipity. So some pre-planning apps that are helpful. First up, of course, Sky Safari, and I defer to Jerry on his presentations about Sky Safari. PhotoPills and Planet are apps for landscape photography that are very helpful. And I've had PhotoPills for a number of years, and it helps with planning the angle of the sun and the moon and the Milky Way. I recently downloaded Planet, and it has also planets and stars and constellations and dark sky maps and virtual reality screens that it puts together based on Google Earth. And anyway, I'm learning how to use it. So this is a screenshot of PhotoPills that I used to plan the photos of the recent lunar eclipse over the Three Sisters. And so up here on the right is the camera position. Down here is South Sister, right here, this dark line here is the position of the moon at 4:17 a.m. And when you move the time slider back and forth, then this line for the position of the moon moves back and forth. So this was the shot that I got at 4:30 a.m. So it's the moon has moved a little bit further to the right. And over here, I could see that it was going to set somewhere around North Sister. And as it happened, it set right into the side of North Sister, and the angle of it was serendipitous that the angle of the shadow on the moon kind of sort of matched the angle of the slope of North Sister. Okay, so a couple of quick words about the Milky Way itself.
Hey, Alan,
Yes.
where were you located to get those angles? You weren't in Eugene, you were farther
No,
up. toward
I was in Sisters. So
Okay.
the town of Sisters is right here. You can see part of the text is cut off here.
Right,
So I was outside of Sisters.
nice, thank you.
Okay. All right. So the Milky Way season actually starts in the end of winter, the beginning of spring, at which time it rises in the east just before dawn. And at this time, it lays in this low arc here. And this is the kind of setting that you need for those pictures of like the arch of the Milky Way over some landscape feature, like a mountain range or something. And that needs to happen kind of early in the season in order to get a good shot of that. By the end of spring and the beginning of summer, the southern part of the Milky Way moves into the southern part of the sky. And this is the time that you can get the bottom of the tail of Scorpius here. And notice that at this time, the Milky Way goes up in this diagonal up towards the upper left. Later in the season, at the end of summer and the beginning of fall, the Milky Way moves further to the west. And when it crosses the zenith up here, then you can get pictures of it standing straight up on end. All right, so we all know that you have to get out of the sky glow from Eugene to be able to get good images of the Milky Way. And so here's a shot from downtown, and let's see, the teapot is right in here, and you cannot see anything at all of the Milky Way in this shot. And as I was putting together this presentation, the thought occurred to me that I've been trying for years to get like a shot of the Milky Way from home, and I still have nothing good to show for my efforts. However, this shot is taken from a City of Eugene park that is kind of over the South Hills, and it's pointing to the south. So if you're pointing away from the sky dome, then you can start to pick up like some of the dark lanes and stuff of the Milky Way. This is from the same location. Now this shot here was taken just outside of town on the southwest edge of town. And this site is less than 10 miles from my home in River Road area. And this shot is from Fern Ridge, and kind of a nice shot, not quite as fully developed up here though. All right, so if we go further out of town, then we can get into some darker sites. So Eagles Ridge is down here southeast of town, in the blue zone. Eureka Ridge was southwest of town in the blue zone. Lindslaw is kind of right here in this gap between Florence and Eugene, and it is unusually dark for being so close. The Three Sisters are right over here, and they're actually in the blue zone outside of Bend. But McKenzie Bridge is right here in the gap between Eugene and Bend. And if you go southeast from Oak Ridge, like Lake Waldo's up here, and it's starting to get pretty dark, and down here is Crater Lake. So this is a shot from Eagles Ridge, and what I particularly like about this shot is that you can see the Dark Horse Nebula here before it even got fully dark out. And this is another shot from when it did get dark out. This is Lindslaw, and you can see some sky glow from Roseburg off in the distance, but it's considerably darker to the south and west. This is from McKenzie Bridge, and this was just kind of a quick grab shot, and I didn't do as good a job as I could on it. However, it's interesting, like this is pretty much due south, right in here. And there's this ridge to the south of McKenzie Bridge. And so the teapot never comes up over the ridge, never becomes visible. It starts from about the lagoon and the Triffid and goes up from there. And of course, Oregon has some really dark skies in eastern Oregon. So Pine Mountain is kind of on the edge of it, and OSP is kind of on the edge of where it gets really dark. Over here is about where Steens Mountain is, and I've seen some pictures on the internet from Steens Mountain and the Alvord Desert, where you can plainly see the sky globe from Boise to the northeast. But I've been looking at this area here between Steens Mountain, Hart Mountain National Antelope Refuge. Let's see, it's over about here, and then Sheldon National Antelope Refuge. So they make kind of a triangle, and this is where probably the darkest skies in Oregon are. I also want to point out that the Massacre Rim dark sky, what is it, wilderness or whatever, is down here southwest of Sheldon National Antelope Refuge. So this is a shot from OSP. Unfortunately, I don't have very many shots from Eastern Oregon to present. All right, so equipment. Am I going too fast? Okay. So traditionally, when we think of astrophotography, we tend to think of like a telescope on a go-to mount with an auto guider, a cooled camera with a filter wheel for shooting each color separately, one at a time, computer to control them all, power supply to power them all, lots of cables, lots of stuff. This is my Milky Way setup. I have a DSLR on a regular photo tripod, or I can put it on, I have a modified simple equatorial mount that is motorized but not auto guiding nor go-to. Here's some other trackers that people use for doing short focal length astrophotography. All right, so Dr. Clark says that there isn't really a whole lot of difference from one modern camera to another, and that really you should look at your lenses. But I downloaded these off of Photons to Photos. So this is my camera over here on the left with an ASPC sensor. And over here is a full frame camera, Canon 6D M2. And what I want to point out here is that there isn't a whole lot of difference in the noise level, but there's a massive difference with full frame cameras in the full well saturation. And so that means that a full frame camera can absorb a whole lot more photons before it before the pixel tops out. Once the pixel tops out, you can't get any more detail, and it starts to spill over into neighboring pixels. So another guy did this is off of Cloudy Nights, and he shot spectrographs of the sun and lined up the dark lines. So you can see that, for instance, these Canons have a little bit more sensitivity on the deep red end in the all-important hydrogen alpha area. And this Sony down here has more sensitivity here on the blue end. All right, so lenses. This is from Dr. Clark's website. And what I find interesting is this bottom row here. All these lenses are set to f2.8. So a 20 millimeter lens has a 7.1 millimeter aperture diameter, and a 200 millimeter lens has a 71.4 millimeter aperture diameter. Keep in mind that what is really important and affects the light gathering capability of a lens is the aperture area in square millimeters. So Dr. Clark makes the point, there's a lot of people out there who, like, when they're doing Milky Way photography, they're thinking super wide angle lenses, and then you can use a longer shutter speed before you get star trails on a standard photo tripod. And Dr. Clark actually recommends going with a longer lens that'll give you a wider opening and gather more light. And then mosaic the frames together to get the same picture area. Sigma makes this art series lenses that are kind of top of the line. And so this is a 105 millimeter lens that people shoot wide open at f1.4 and get sharp stars corner to corner. So at f1.4, that gives you an aperture diameter of 75 millimeters, which is pretty good. It's also got a price tag of, I think it was $1,700, but it may have come down a little bit. On the other end of the price scale are the Nifty 50 lenses. So this is my old Olympus lens that I had on my Olympus camera in the 1980s. And it's an f1.8. I usually end up exposing at f4 to get sharper stars. And it's probably my best lens for astrophotography at this point. I know that Canon makes a You can get a brand new 50 millimeter lens, f1.8 for under $200. All right, so settings. Always shoot raw images. Daylight, white balance, manual focus. I set the lens aperture at the widest setting that you can get a sharp image. Shutter speed at the longest that your mount will handle, and then adjust the ISO to the lowest that works. And use an intervalometer or a self-timer so that you don't get blurry pictures. All right, so Dr. Clark shoots light frames, no dark frames, no flat frames, no bias frames. And he makes the point that modern stock photo equipment, they have lens camera profiles that are built into the raw converters. And when you apply that, then you don't need to do the other stuff. I still shoot dark frames, but I rarely bother with the others. All right, so a quick word about image file types for those who may not be aware. JPEG's Joint Photo Expert Group was created for sharing images on the web. They're 8-bit, so they're not very deep. And every time you save an image in JPEG, it recompresses the image and you lose some data in the shadows, which is exactly where our astrophotography images are. All right, so raw images, originally it was thought they were straight out of the camera sensor, but it's become clear over the years that all of the camera manufacturers are applying some noise reduction and maybe some other processing to the images in order to make their pictures look good. In the case of Sony, about 4 or 5 years ago, it was documented that their high ISO noise reduction soft processor was subtracting faint stars from the images because it was thinking that they were just noise. Sony has really high quality high ISO noise reduction. I'm not sure whether they actually fixed that problem or not. All right, so TIFF is tagged image file format, and it's great for using for the working files because it's a full 16-bit or more and does layers, and it doesn't do compression. Well, you can do some compression with it, but anyway, it's not lossy compression. All right, so FITS is file image transfer something or other, I forget what. And it's used for a lot of dedicated astrophotography cameras and also download. So like if you download from the Hubble Legacy Archive, they're in a FITS format, and it frequently requires special software to process. Okay, so.
Another question, Alan.
Yes.
Does Photoshop recognize that last file format?
FITS? I'm not sure if the current version of Photoshop does or does not, because the version of Photoshop that I have is 16 years old.
I understand.
And it doesn't even recognize the raw images from my camera, which is about 6 or 7 years old.
Okay.
And so I have to use separate software to convert raw images to TIFFs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have a standard photo camera and you want to focus in the dark, it can be a real challenge. And so the best way to do it is you start out by finding a brighter object in live view and focusing on that as best you can, and zoom in to get it as sharp as you can. And then what you want to do is shift to the dimmest star that you can see on the live view screen. Zoom in all the way and adjust on that dimmer star. What happens is when you're on the brighter object and you twist the barrel of the lens to focus, it moves. There's a greater distance from when it's out of focus to when it's in focus to when it's out of focus on the other side. But when you go to a dimmer object, it's a real narrow distance from out of focus to in focus to out of focus. So it's a little bit like switching from the coarse focus knob on a telescope to a fine focus knob. So after you do that and get it as best you can, then I recommend that you step back and come back to it a few seconds or a minute later and repeat the process 2 or 3 times to make sure that you get it as close to perfect focus as you possibly can. All right, so exposure settings. You set the aperture to the widest so that you gather as much light as quickly as you can. You set the shutter speed to the longest that your mount can handle within reason, and then adjust the ISO to get the histogram correct. Now, what you're going to see out in the dark is that there's going to be this big mountain, and you want that mountain to be about a quarter to a third of the way from the left. You definitely want it off of the left-hand edge. Now, this is kind of a poor screenshot here of the histogram because I did this in my light polluted backyard. So this mountain is really wide. When you go out to a dark sky site, it gets a lot skinnier. And I suspect, but I'm not entirely sure, but I suspect that all of this mountain is probably just the light pollution, and the actual signal may be this skinnier pinnacle right here on the far left. And so in order to get a good exposure from my home, I would need to move that further over to the right, but then the image would be totally swamped out by the light pollution. Okay, so important talk about color. And this is color was actually what got me first started on Dr. Clark's website. All right, so the human eye naturally sees color in red, green, and blue. And standard cameras are designed to match human vision in that way. The Hubble palette was created by scientists in order to show the differences between hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen emission lines. So the Hubble palette, while it's very useful, especially to scientists, is not natural color. So here are the wavelengths for blue vision, green vision, and red vision. And you can see over here is the hydrogen alpha line, which is on the edge of the human red vision. And so while we can see it, our eyes are not very sensitive to it. And the same thing with cameras. So a lot of people have their cameras modified to expand this red curve further over to the right, so they pick up more hydrogen alpha. And we've all seen the really pretty pictures with lots of red in them, but they may not necessarily be natural color. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's just they're not natural. This is a different shot, basically. And so for the Hubble palette, what is typically done is that the sulfur emission line is assigned to red, the hydrogen alpha to green, and the oxygen to blue. And that makes it really easy to see like what's going on in different areas of a nebula. However, again, that's not the kind of natural vision or natural color that matches human eye vision. Okay, so in order to get natural color, do these steps. First, shoot with daylight white balance. Modern cameras, if you shoot on auto white balance, they're not going to be able to calculate it correctly, and you're going to get really off colors. So shoot with daylight white balance. And then in post-processing, you want to set the black points for your red, green, and blue channels. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. For further information on this, read Dr. Clark's articles, and he does have in there a whole procedure for how to go into like Photoshop and you click on a star and get the readings for the different colors, you know, and the RBG channels, and compare it to what type of star it is, whether it's an O or a B star or whatever, and you know, and to track down that way whether or not you're getting accurate color. I tried that about 4 years ago, and I didn't get very far with it. And I was thinking, as I was putting this talk together, that I should probably go back and revisit that. So maybe I will. Okay, so raw converters. Most people use Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw, and the current version of that costs about, what is it, $10 a month or something. And so I frequently use DxO, and it gives very pretty results, and it's easy to work with. Dr. Clark advocates for raw therapy, and it is a free, full-featured raw converter, and I use it also. All right, so Dr. Clark has a page with instructions for how to get the best results out of raw therapy, and I keep a printout of those instructions here on my desk so that when I'm processing images, I can refer to it. All right, so raw therapy, this is a screenshot of the file browser, and you know, you go to the directory and it opens all these thumbnails. You double click on one, go in, set all the settings, and then you copy those settings and put them back on all the other files in that directory, and move them to the queue and tell it to process them, and it converts them all to TIFFs and puts them in whatever directory you tell it to. Somewhat straightforward, a little bit time consuming. All right, stacking software. Deep Sky Stacker has been around for a long time. It's freeware and it does a good job, but it doesn't do like landscape foregrounds or star trails. Affinity Photo just recently came out with an astrophotography module that processes astrophotography images, and I think it's mostly oriented towards the traditional, camera on a telescope, no foregrounds, no star trails. Sequitur I've been using for a few years, and I like it. It's free, it's relatively fast. It'll do freeze ground on the foreground. It'll do star trails, or you can set it for best pixels. And it'll stack my raw CR2 files, which is good for doing like a quick draft to see how it's going to look. And then if it looks good, then I'll process it, the CR2 files into TIFFs using one of the raw converters and do a better stack with that. All right, so here's a shot that I did recently of the Milky Way from Lenzlaw. And I went back and redid it in Sequitur in order to demo it for this presentation. So in the upper left here, you tell it where your light frames are. It will select a base frame based on the middle of the light frames, or you can double click on it and select whatever base frame you want. And then ARC files go here in the noise images. If you have vignette images, you can use those. You tell it where to save the final image. And then we go into the lower settings here. So for doing freeze ground settings, you set the composition to freeze ground, and it comes up with this selective. I've never unselected that, so I'm not sure exactly what that does. In the sky region, it has this thing where you can paint over the image to separate out which areas to freeze and which areas are the stars in the sky. And I have discovered that it works best if I don't touch it. I just let the computer figure it out. All right, so auto brightness. Sometimes I turn it on, sometimes I turn it off. HDR on. Remove dynamic noises on. Reduce distortion effects. I usually set to complex. Reduce light pollution. Sounds like it would be interesting, but it gives weird halos and After Effects, so I always leave it off. And then enhance starlight makes the stars look brighter. And so sometimes I turn it on, sometimes I turn it off. So when you get all your settings set the way you want, then you click the start button, and it gives you a little dialogue here. This green bar at the top shows how far along it is, and it gives you an estimate of time remaining at the bottom. When it's done, it says completed successfully. You click close, and it gives you a preview on the screen, as well as saving the file to the location. All right, so for best pixels, you select align stars, select best pixels, and then there's this slider here for more strict and less strict. And all the rest of the settings here I left the same as in freeze ground. All right, so unfortunately, my demo gave me a really crappy result on best pictures, so I apologize for that. I didn't go back and redo the whole series just to get a better screenshot of this. Next, there we go. For star trails, Okay, so I click on trails here, and then there's this motion effect checkbox here. And I like it. You can play with it on or off. And the rest of the settings are left exactly the same. And so this is what star trails with motion effect look like. It's kind of like, meteors or whatever. And it's brighter on the one side and fades away to dimmer on the other side. Usually when I do star trails, I like to add in point stars. So I took a single frame from the end of the run. Usually I'll cut off the run, like if I have 100 frames, maybe do only 90 to 95, and then use the last frame for the single point stars. And on here, I kind of sort of I should have had a wider gap here. You can see the gap here on the medium bright stars, but these bright ones, there's no real gap. Also note that on the star trails, it shows up this satellite trail here. And whereas on the other settings, it seems to recognize that the satellite is just an outlier and it ignores it. All right, so this is an example that I did. I was looking at from Lens Law where the bottom of the tail of Scorpius is, which is this star right here. Eta Scorpius is the southernmost star in the tail of Scorpius. And so I picked the frame where that was in its southernmost position, and I did star trails where they were equal from, I did 50 frames before and 50 frames after, and put in the single star here in the middle. You can see that these star trails are not the motion effect. They're just a straight line. And I think the motion effect for star trails, it's usually more interesting. Okay, so now, after you have your stacked image by whatever settings you use, you want to go in and set your black points. All right, so we open the stacked image. Here's in Photoshop, and you create a levels for the black points. So you go into the red channel here, and you move the black point slider over to where the histogram takes off, where it goes up substantially. And that means everything in the red below that goes to black. All right, and then you do the same thing for the green channel. Now notice here that the image is getting really dark, and at this point it's off color until we do the blue channel, at which point now we have a neutral black here in the image, but it's still very dark. So then I create another levels and move the white point slider over and maybe adjust the midpoint slider. And once I do that, then I can kind of sort of start to see what I've got. And I can go for whatever further processing from there. As an alternative to setting the black points by hand, Roger Clark has a color stretch freeware, and I highly recommend checking it out. All right, so it's free. It can produce excellent results. It does not handle gradients at all. And it can be somewhat challenging to understand, and you kind of sort of have to experiment with trial and error to get it right. The actual program is a DOS-based command line interface, but there's a Windows-based GUI available on the same download page. So here's a screenshot of his page about this software. He's actually got a couple of pages about the software. And this is a screenshot of the graphic user interface. And so you open up the file. First, you have to save the stacked image as a PNG format. So you open that up, and then you set the settings that I usually will play with are these first three right here, and this S-curve type here. And then it runs in a command line interface. And if everything goes correctly, then when it's done, it says, press the any key to continue. And when it's done, then, well, here I've got a unstretched image on the left, which is straight from the stacker. And here's the stretched image on the right. And so the first thing you need to do is to set your white point level so you can start to see what you've got and what you don't have. And here's a comparison. This one, the black points were set manually, and this one has Roger Clark's processed it. And so there is better color here in Roger's color stretch software. It also preserves more detail down here in the fainter regions, and can't see it on my screen because of that. People's heads in the way, but over here there's a you see more of in this area. All right, so I encourage you to download it and play with it and see what it'll do for you. Okay, so now here are some of my images. This one's the Three Sisters from McKenzie Pass, and I did a selfie, and some star trails, not the star trails, and some other various assorted images. So I thank you for your time. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I hope you get at least something useful out of this presentation. And if anybody out there would like to get together and maybe do a field trip up in the Cascades to photograph the Milky Way, then please feel free to contact me. So, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Great job, Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good.
I had never heard of the FITS format before.
Oh, it's very common. It's what the professionals use. And it's also used by a lot of the, special astrophotography cameras.
You have
think
your
Pixel's
camera stretched in the red?
No,
So yours is just
I
stock?
do not.
Uh-huh.
It's stock, yes. I might not mind playing with a modified camera sometime, but I don't have one at this point in time.
Understand.
Probably be more likely to invest in a stock camera and a better lens.
I forgot, did you say you're shooting Canon or Nikon? What?
Yes, I have a Canon SL1.
Oh, okay. I
The
could,
current version is the SL3, so it's an older camera body now, and it's entry level.
I'd be glad to loan you my modified camera if you want to try it for a bit.
Oh,
I've
is
got
it?
a 5D Mark III that's
Oh,
modified.
yeah, that's a good full frame camera. I'm not sure if I have any lenses that are full frame. Well, I guess the Olympus lens would be, but it
Yeah,
might have some significant
Got a cheap-
vignetting.
I've also got a cheap nifty 50 lens, and
Uh-huh.
at least it'd be worth trying. If you're interested, we could talk by email.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind going out sometime and shooting with you.
Alan,
Okay,
I've got a question for you.
sure.
It seems to me, I thought I'd seen on Roger Clark's website years ago, he had done experiments to see if he could figure out what's the optimal ASA setting for Canon cameras. I thought he came up with the number 1600. And I've got a Canon 60D, and almost all of my deep sky stuff is all pretty much 1600, unless something is very bright or very faint, and then I go up one or down one.
Yeah, he's got, I don't know how many pages he has talking about like optimum ISOs and stuff. And the hit that I got from his articles are that, you know, some cameras are better at 800, some cameras are better at 1600, and some are better at, you know, 6400 or higher. So it varies from camera body to camera body.
Yeah, the one I have for the 5D Mark III is at 3200, and it's really quite true. It can go down from there when possible, but it's an excellent starting place. And that was based on his website.
He's got a lot of information on his website, and it takes quite a while to get through it all. And I find too that I kind of need to periodically go back to it and reread it. And like I said, I need to revisit the accuracy of my color. And, you know, maybe now that I'm retired, I'll have the time and the gumption to do that.
Do we have more questions? Well, thank you, Ellen. Once again, really good stuff.
Good. Hope I didn't bore you too much.
No, not at all.
That's good.
Overwhelmed is more like it, but not bored at all, certainly.
Yeah.